Hope everybody's having a good day here. Thanks everybody for coming. Um, so today I'm hoping to talk about what I consider to be the hardest problem that I've encountered trying to get teams to start testing software. And I just kind of want to explore it with everybody here. So before we start, I want to go over a couple of things. One, I'm hoping that everybody is willing to jump into a little bit of light participation. For those of you who have anxiety about that, no one's getting put on the spot. You can relax and stay completely uninteractive to your heart's content. But if you do want to engage in some of this, it'd probably be good to have a space where you can take just a small amount of notes. So during this, we're going to go ahead and take testing as just a good inherently. We won't be litigating any of that. So we're starting from the perspective of testing is good. We want to evangelize it. We want to see more teams adopt it. Yeah. And last thing is more just something I'd like people to keep in mind throughout all of this. Whether you are working by contract as a consultant, like us folks at Eighth Light, if you're employed full time, or you're just working on a passion project, emotional labor is kind of the core of what all of us do when we do anything together. And changing behaviors of groups is really, really hard work. And I think that's something that can often get faded out of our discussions around how to get new practices up and running. So before we go any further, I'd like to do a quick mindfulness exercise with everybody. And this is just to sort of get us into a better, sort of calmer, focused headspace. So first off, I'd like everybody to ask themselves, how well did you sleep last night? Are you feeling disconnected? Are you feeling present? Sleep is a thing that affects so much of who we are. If you get too little, too much, those can drastically change your experience of a day. How hungry are you right now? It is around lunchtime, at least in Central Time. Um, Bodily needs are something that can easily take our attention away from anything else. They frequently will adjust and color everything we do, our thinking, our mood. Feeling pain or discomfort without realizing it is also something that can easily find its way into becoming other problems. What is one thing that you're proud of this week? What is something that prompts feelings of anxiety or vulnerability? And we won't be sharing any of this. This is just for everybody's personal sort of introspection. And then, what specific emotions are you feeling right now? When try to list at least a couple, but try to be specific. Go ahead and avoid blanket statements like tired, okay, good, etc. Those may be true to your experience, but they're not emotions. And last, go ahead, take a moment and just take a deep breath. And when you exhale, let your body relax and just have a quiet moment. All right. So the most straightforward things in the world get complicated very quickly when you add one magic ingredient, and that magic ingredient is people. The problems can be really small. You might have disagreements over specific code style decisions. You may end up needing to tackle a much bigger problem. You may need to decide on policies around source control that sit across multiple teams, which can have all sorts of downstream effects. When enough people end up encountering a problem, you end up getting people trying to solve it. And if you get enough people who manage to solve it and the solution is working well enough for them, you can get a whole movement going. And as the discourse ends up deepening with more people joining the conversation with much more diverse backgrounds and different versions of the problem that they need to solve, this is going to deepen the complexity of the answers that everybody is coming up with for their own issues. Unfortunately, this also tends to deepen the complexity of actually using the solution in the first place. Um, with a complicated set of solutions for your problem, it can be really hard to figure out how to apply any of this wisdom to your own situation. And it's very easy to fail at trying to implement a solution. It's really easy for things to get abandoned. And one thing I'd just like to ask is how many of you here have ever seen tests that never get run? Or there were tests that were deleted or commented out, or even if they do run, they are inconsistent to a point where they don't provide any useful feedback. A test fails and no one knows if that actually means anything. A test passes and QA still has to exhaust all the simple functionality themselves by hand. These are super common problems. This is something that you will see on so many projects. And there's a near endless number of tools out there for testing. There are all sorts of libraries for running the tests, for defining them, for making assertions. There are all sorts of different ways you can do results reporting and analysis. There are all sorts of CI solutions. There are books, videos, talks from people who will swear up and down to you that they have this problem solved. Present talk excluded. Continually, teams are going to find that implementing testing can be a remarkably hard problem. And so much of the discourse has focused on ignorance around testing practices or technology or styles you can use. But why is it so hard to get a team to test code? Now, this is the point where I might start suggesting style or a technological solution, something you could integrate into any project that'll solve so many of these issues or reduce friction around certain pain points when doing stories. But there is no tool that exists that's going to fix a lot of the problems that sabotage testing efforts. And one of the things with that is, what if testing is not a unique problem unto itself? So for everyone here, how many times have you watched documentation efforts just sort of slowly slide into abandonment? Or even if it continues, it can turn into a reference that's only occasionally useful and only for the people who already have all the context. Teams can argue over what tools to use. Are we doing auto docs? Are we trying to do, documenting comments? Are we actually going to write things out? Do we need Swagger? These tools can require infrastructure and implementation time that's really significant. The standards can be hard to define. How do you know if a piece of documentation, even if it meets standards? I just saw somebody raise their hand. Please put comments, answers to questions I have, or questions you have into the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them. Where was I? Yes, so standards can be really hard to define. How do you know if a bit of documentation, even if it meets the standard, is going to convey what it actually needs to, or that people are going to understand? And often people can forget that committing to having documentation means that you need to commit to writing documentation. Someone actually has to sit down and work on it, not implementing bug fixes or a new feature. They're working on documentation. Story writing is something that can go very much the same direction. If issues are way too contentious and the pressures are just too great, you can have a pile of unestimated headlines with zero context. Testing fails not because testing itself is hard, but because the problems with it are ones that frequently get devalued. And, testing at its heart, it's just writing code that calls other code. This is something that we do constantly every day. It's not a radical change to the job. It's a decision about what code you're writing. And this is a thing that we handle all the time: what code to write, how to write it. Um, None of it is that out of the normal wheelhouse. And so we've all seen a few things that will sabotage testing alongside many other team-wide efforts. And to hopefully not sound completely like a third semester undergrad philosophy student who has figured out everything, um, what if we have so much problem testing because people value different things and we see conflict as a failure state? So, what if we are not taking time to systemically address the values of everyone on the team? Do we know our own values well enough if we're the person acting as an advocate for testing practices? So, what are values when the things I'm talking about here? The definition I'm going to use, hopefully reasonably straightforward. It's the things a person cares about before other things, that they will pursue above other goals when given the opportunity. And so these are things that can power really small actions. Respect for others and desire for community can lead you to thanking people who do things for you. Um, and a personal value might drive you to stick to a daily schedule as a way for caring for oneself. And there's a question in chat. Um, yes, I would distinguish between implementing testing and implementing a specific test. What I'm talking about here with implementing testing is implementing the practices and standards across a team for a whole code base. So it's less, how do you test this one piece of functionality or this particular network call, and more, are we going to require these things on pull requests? Does everything have to have a certain amount of coverage? What are the team boundaries around this? But thank you for asking that. Um, so values influence everything we do in our life. They color all the choices we make. They color all of our moods, and how we even interpret events. They can express themselves in really small ways. Saying thank you to anyone who does something nice for you. They can prompt a significant amount of conflict, and frequently they can even cover huge, big ideas. Just look to the any of the works of political theory from the great Sonic the Hedgehog. Values can encompass very big ideas. Um, One thing I'd like to do here now is I'd like to spend a few minutes and have everyone try to list at least 3 to 4 of their own values. And they don't have to be really important or unique, but I'd like them to feel true to you, that there's some kind of resonance for you with them. And for anybody who's doing this, if you feel comfortable with it, I'd actually like to ask you to share one of them in chat, just one of the ones you end up identifying. I have some examples here for everybody. You don't have to use this list only. It's just here to give you some ideas about values you may identify in yourself. But take a moment to, just come up with a small handful and share with everybody one that seems particularly unique or important to you. To As an additional example, I can identify a couple of my own. Community is a big value of mine. I really highly value having spaces that are built together by people who support each other. That's a very big driver in my life. Another one is understanding why things work the way that they do. I mostly express that as an obsession with critical analysis of film and video games, because I'm not capable of having fun if it's not at least a little pretentious. But that's me. Empathy, life cycle management. Will this code be easy to maintain? I like that. Safety. That is a very big one. Reliability. That's definitely something. Um, Discipline. Yeah, these are all big things. Robustness. I like it. Trust. There we go. I've got Zoom chat on my phone here to clutter my presentation a little less. So for opposing values, you can't really argue these things away. If people value different things, they're not just going to walk away from a value of theirs with a conversation. It's going to take time, and you have to connect them to a new value in its stead, or an existing one that is going to prove more valuable to them in new context. All the discussion in the world is not going to change people fundamentally disagreeing with each other on what's actually important in life. So, in situations where starting a testing system for a team has failed, it's really easy to identify places where there is resistance. So we could have someone who refuses to write tests. We could have someone who does write tests, but they're not really following the style. They're maybe not as effective. You can easily have stakeholders considering it extra work and a waste of developer time. Excuse me. Something that they will fight against, something that they maybe is a bit of a landmine in a conversation when you're talking with stakeholders. And there's another word, I think, for what's happening here, which some of you can probably guess, but it's all conflict. So people flouting guidelines, bringing up arguments after they're settled, undermining team goals, these are expressions of conflict. So it's conflict that appears in super frustrating ways. But we're very used to treating this sort of thing as inherently bad. We're all supposed to agree on the good practice and eat our vegetables and whatnot. You know, you're supposed to test. If it's a senior member of a team making the choice, there can be very little room for anyone else to discuss it. And resolving a conflict ultimately requires vulnerability from all parties, something that may not be safe for everyone on every team. Testing, a lot of the time, no matter what technology stack you choose, will fail because teams will walk up to conflict and just stop. There's a team member that no one feels up to challenging. People overseeing work may shy away from holding boundaries that the team agreed to. Someone might act out in counterproductive ways in small or even large fashions. Some may never even state their opposition. They may not even fully understand their opposition. It may stem from confusion, which can certainly be a strong motivator to find conflict elsewhere. To implement a testing strategy, you really need consensus around some shared values that everyone can act on. So the big question is, how do you achieve that? For a simple answer, if anyone knows that, please tell me. Also, most world governments and anyone who's ever been involved in any kind of interpersonal relationship, I'll have contact info at the end. But with context on specific situations and the right perspective, I think we can take really good shots at getting testing practices that will stick. We just need to know what our conflict is. So what can we look to for a pristine example of conflict? I'll share a couple of examples, and these are a little stark, but that's intentional. I want it to be very easy to sort of see the dividing line here. And while we're doing this, I'd like everybody else to think of one situation in their past where there was a conflict that managed to sabotage some things. And I'd like you to keep that in mind as we go through some other examples after this. So I used to work phone tech support for a university. It involved helping people with basic account issues, resetting a password, getting into your email, etc. Um, there was a person that we were all acquainted with. They called for a specific reason, and it was well within the script. I would like to say here, if you ever want to lose faith in humanity, work customer service. And if you're a person who has not worked in customer service before, just try to err on the side of being nice to everyone. Their life is probably harder than yours at the time. So I received the call first, and I was asking questions, just trying to make sure I had all the context. And he continued to get angrier about this. And ultimately, he got very impatient that I was just asking questions and not fixing anything. When I said that there's no button that I could hit as a low-level tech support person to correct this, he demanded to be corrected to the director of the department. I told him I'd reach out. The director was not in, and I knew that, but I wanted to take a moment to breathe while he was on hold. I came back and told him that the director was not available, and he immediately hung up. And a coworker of mine had their phone ring, and when they picked up, you could immediately hear the yelling through the receiver. Shortly after that, he lost all privileges for phone tech support from the department. So I once worked at a place where we had this really great sort of loose but functioning process for tracking and planning work. The overriding goal was that everybody was working on something of importance and use to the company at large or stakeholder teams for us. So the executives of the company were frequently unhappy that the developers could not turn the application on a dime or get significant complicated features out as quickly as they wanted them to. And they frequently identified the management process and the work tracking as the source of this issue. And so they would frequently find developers sitting alone and lean on them to do work outside the normal process. It's got to the point where they had been trading around spreadsheets of fantasy developer assignments to work without ever telling anyone in the technology end of the company. The relationship pretty much just continued to break down until they were very set on the position that the developers were a waste of time and just hurting everything. And so I share these because they have a couple of things in common. The people who are planting their flag on a hill and prompting a fight here, they are trying to bypass and abuse their way out of a system. And it's because they don't value the goals that the system was created to serve. And they don't value the goals of the people in the system that they need to work with. The fellow who called the help desk, he was not going to get anything fixed unless one of us helped him. And none of us were going to help him while he was screaming. The executives needed developers to write software. There's no getting around that. And they're focusing on their frustrations without any eye towards collaborating or communication was a huge problem. The process was entirely unimportant to these folks at the time. And ultimately, because they didn't care about the values that the folks working the help desk or in the computing services department or the developers working for this company, because they didn't care about what their values were, there's not really a remedy here. They are going to steamroll and cause destruction. Fortunately, not all conflict is quite so stark, and I'm catching up on chat here. Some conflicts were politically based. Many revolved around interpretation of the requirements. Some had to do with implementing a requirement. That is a thing that will be difficult to untangle on many teams. So let's picture a team working on a piece of software. We have a private company, modest size. And so We've got a member of the team who wants to get testing integrated into this team's process. She makes the most convincing case she can, extolling the benefits to the team's skills, the reliability of their product, therefore freeing up everybody on the team to work on things they would actually like to work on more than just fixing bugs and being blocked all the time. Um, and the comprehensibility of their code so they can ramp up new people much more quickly. Or if you're a normal software developer and haven't opened a specific file in more than 2 weeks, you'll probably have forgotten everything in it. The team, unfortunately, doesn't outright accept the claims of benefits. And there are some folks who are asserting that the claimed benefits can't actually be worth it. A senior member of the team says the time required to train up the entire team would grind everything to a halt, and that there's no way it can possibly be justified. They're concerned about the speed of delivery and how this is going to impact it. Another teammate says that in their past experience, testing has only taught them that this software is going to be rigid, it's going to be too brittle, and it's not going to work well enough to provide reliable feedback. They're looking at it as something that's going to sit over every PR review that they have to do, dramatically increasing the back end work on any story they're finishing. And as the discussion continues, the product owner expresses significant interest in the improved quality. Our advocate came armed with case studies, but they don't know how to justify that against the possibility of slowed progress. On top of that, they're very confused as to how this will affect the tracking of work. Does the format of stories need to change? How does this affect estimates? Does QA need to be involved in this? And all the way at the back of the room, there's a manager who really just wishes the team of professionals they were over would be able to make a good decision reasonably quickly. And they're not terribly concerned about the specifics of that decision. They just want to make sure that everybody has the tools they need and that the team is on track. If you're a fan of writing code that runs other code in order to make factual statements about the code it's running, you can probably see some problems cropping up here. In this situation, our advocate is getting increasingly frustrated, and she wishes the team would just share her vision. Her vision in specific happens to be that the team adopts testing practices so fully that they are test driving their code, requiring of it of every single change to the code base, even when they go back to legacy portions of the code base. If you change it, it gets tests. Excuse me. She wants the team to succeed in adopting testing practices. But what does success look like here? And I don't mean like, how do we get there? What specific steps do we take in achieving that goal? I mean, where are we trying to end up? We need to know where we're going. And to figure out a way forward, we have to know what success looks like. Is it the advocate's, I personally believe correct, but utopian vision of testing? What about the other members of the team? They're going to be a part of this. What does success look like for them? Even if there is a way for our advocate to prove the rest of the team objectively wrong in their complaints, while she sits atop her throne, triumphant, built of jest and the skulls of her enemies, the team is still going to have to come along for the ride. So success in this case is going to require inclusion. So inclusion in this case means creating an approach that's going to serve the needs of everybody involved. And so what are their needs? We can guess some of them from context, but I'm going to talk through this a bit more, but I'm curious if the folks on the call have any ideas about what some of the needs that various members of the team would have from this testing process. And to get into just a little bit, a couple of the parties here are pretty straightforward. For the manager, their concern is they just don't want indecision or a bad decision hanging over them. They have a couple major needs. There's speed and a plan, and that's pretty much it. So we have that is from the manager's perspective, who is reasonably uninvolved. But we've got this product owner, we've got a senior developer, and we have another, rank and file developer on the team. What are the things that they need out of this situation? The senior developer is going to be accountable for and accountable to a bunch of people. They're going to need to keep up with all the technology that the team is using to a degree where they can capably join in discussions and development on it. They can effectively review it. They're also likely going to be a person who is out in front of stakeholders quite frequently. And they've worked there for a while, so they have a very good idea of what disruption to processes will do to teams in this organization. The regular teammate mostly very badly just needs these changes to not throw any wrenches in what they're doing. They have a job that they like, they know what's expected of them, they know what they need to do. To them, testing sounds like this unpleasant, confusing mess that's now just going to sit on top of everything that they're trying to do. Um, so, what are the needs of these folks? The senior developer is going to need this testing system to be understandable, measurable, and to come in discrete enough steps that you have good guidelines of what needs to happen when. The regular teammate also needs it to be understandable, but more importantly, they need it to be straightforward. They need to know what's required of them, and they need to know that their workload is not going to become more painful. Does this mean pushing back on deadlines or opening up more space for them? It could include that. So all of this is going to end up changing what our definition of success looks like. And so we need to resolve a conflict here. And this conflict involves experienced professionals who all have an understanding of their values. One of the things we're going to need here is consensus. So everyone needs to agree on what it is we're actually doing. The process itself needs to be clearly defined for everyone. The second thing we need is consent, that everyone is able to freely agree to participate in good faith. Another thing we need is trust. This is the assumption from one person that other members of the team will themselves be operating in good faith. And lastly, we need safety. And there's a couple major kinds of safety that I'm thinking about in this context. One of them is psychological. This is the safety to make mistakes. You can think about this probably from the perspective of the more rank and file developer. They need space to be bad at something because they're going to be learning how to do it. And even if it's something they already kind of know how to do, they're going to be learning how to do it in the context of their current project. Everyone involved needs to know that these requirements will not come with rapidly rising stakes. They need to understand that it's okay to involve themselves in the process and not be perfect. The second kind of safety is physical, which it's not going to be the largest, it's not going to be a huge part of the discussion here today, but I think it's very worth always keeping in mind that not everyone gets to work at a job that provides them with physical safety. And that is something that will rapidly sabotage a lot of collective efforts if you have people afraid for more than just whether or not they make a mistake. So given where everyone is starting on this team, there's some distance to cover here. The goal espoused by our testing advocate is something the team is honestly probably not capable of right now. Success is going to involve what? Does it mean the team needs to adopt testing practices as fully as possible, just jumping right into the abyss of automated code assurance? That doesn't seem likely. The needs of the rest of the team, apart from our advocate, are also very real and should not be steamrolled. And to be clear, I mean the needs of these team members, not specific points that they may be making. Um, And our testing advocate's goal doesn't really have much room for alternative needs. It's a very simple sort of statement coming from the perspective of someone who already feels secure in doing this. The new system, of course, also needs to correctly exercise some code. They'll figure that part out. Uh, but it must be straightforward, measurable, have discrete steps, a plan for implementation, a clear idea of how it will affect everyone's work, and to also not make anyone's life more painful. That is a huge amount to ask of any new team process. That is so much ground to cover right out the gate that the goal, at least as stated by our advocate, is going to go down in flames. This is a team that in 3 months will be commenting out and deleting their tests, most likely. So, how do we include the team in this process? Not just writing the tests and reviewing them and all of that, but how do we include them in the process of developing the testing practices? Well, the first thing we can do is make the problem a little simpler. So rather than trying to come up with this grand Byzantine idea of what our testing practices are and all of our standards and everything, pick something small and put some tests on it. This is an easy place to start, and it does a couple of really great things. It provides examples, but also it does so in the context of it can be done in the context of a code base that everybody on the team knows. You can pick an area of the code base that everyone's super familiar with. The examples that you produce, you can recruit other members of the team, or our advocate could, that have interest. Not everyone on the team is outright opposed to testing. She can, with examples, discuss with the product owner exactly how this looks in the day-to-day work. They can document the process and, more importantly, improve the documentation when they first release it and find out what's wrong with it. The standards can start with a lower, much more welcoming bar. You don't have to start from a place where each and every single code path is completely and exhaustively exercised, especially if you're starting with a team that is not familiar with writing tests. It may not hit all the goals you want initially, but it does lower the barrier of entry massively, which that by itself is much more important than is often given credit. And examples of how testing existing code or what testing new code looks like will help people immensely. Software developers are very good at picking up on the context of an example and then synthesizing something new. It's a core part of the job. So, lastly, you need to expect the nature of these practices to change. One of the big benefits of starting small is that when input from the rest of the team inevitably changes what you're doing, you're in a good place to roll with it. And other members of the team wanting to modify it is a good thing. They're invested and feel a sense of ownership. They're being given an opportunity to help make this something they are a part of as well. And so all of these are approaches that our advocate could use in this situation. And all of these can start from a place of considering why other team members might be justifiably resistant to a change in practices, or why they might be resisting because there's a differing set of values or a differing set of expectations. And this example is also a little simpler because we're getting to assume here that everyone came into it in good faith and that they all care about what they're doing in mostly the same way. So, yeah. So our advocate has a number of tools available to her in that circumstance to move forward with this team. And as long as she focuses on making sure that the people who are in opposition feel heard and that they feel that their needs are concerns are addressed in an earnest fashion, their resistance will likely disappear. And so let's try another example. So we've got an open source project. They've recently updated their code of conduct and practices to require test coverage for all changes to the code base. So we have another advocate. They've won a hard-fought battle convincing the bulk of contributors to adopt the practice after a community vote. The maintainer and older contributors were in opposition, but it was not particularly firm or organized. The maintainer doesn't complain much since they only review submitted changes and don't spend a lot of time actually writing the code themselves. So they've also picked up a new contributor who's joined the community and immediately squashed some really high profile bugs. After some time though, their changes start getting held up. So this new contributor has been going after more and more bugs and picking up new features. They're really invested, and they're personally using their retirement from the software industry to pursue some public good with their skills. But there's questions about how well they're meeting the standards of the project. Their submissions have included test coverage, but they had some issues. Lots of conditional paths that aren't exercised or verified by the tests, error cases not being covered, and sometimes the tests end up just being a collection of mocks interacting with other mocks and not actually delivering any useful information. And on top of that, a longtime seasoned contributor who was initially opposed to the requirement of testing has continued submissions, but without much test coverage. There will be a couple of top-level, shallow, happy path tests and nothing else. And one change, in fact, only included a test that ultimately proved an object could be instantiated in the language that they were using. When feedback requesting more effective and granular test coverage was given, they argue that what's important is already covered. They refuse to budge on this, and after several back and forth messages, start questioning the policy. A selling point of testing was meant to improve the review process, to make code easier to verify and not hold up these changes in confusion and uncertainty, which they claim is what this is doing now. They say that between a new job and their first kid, they barely have time to contribute at all. What good is this part of the process? Neither of these things have improved with consistent feedback. So we need to pick somewhere to start. Let's go ahead and start with the new contributor. And this is something I'd really like some responses from folks in the audience for. We have this new contributor, happy to try new stuff. They believe in the project. They come with great intentions, but their lack of response to feedback is a problem. What might motivate someone with really great intentions to be violating the spirit of the plan like this, if not the letter? Anyone have any ideas?
Maybe the lack of input they had in that decision.
Yeah.
So it would be I was just going to say that they have a mentality of this is how we've always done it. And they don't even have reference to the spirit. This is just kind of like how they were told to do it.
Sure. Anyone have any other ideas? Ooh, test setup is tough and the environment is slow. Tests seem opaque. Yeah, if the moment-to-moment work is frustrating and challenging, that can absolutely cause a problem. If your feedback loop on getting a test result is 15 to 20 minutes, it's going to make it real hard to keep your motivation to test. Some do not like change. This is true. I would push back on that a tiny bit, only in as much as I think it's worth diving into why they don't like the change. Because I don't think anyone out there is just opposed to change in and of itself. Though with that, I think there are definitely folks who can get very comfortable and will regard change as a threat to their sense of safety. And so, that's something that could be prompting this behavior. Ego, yes. So I would actually put that under the umbrella of lack of safety. Someone who wants to maintain their self-image and is concerned about what it might mean if they don't get to continue as they want to. That is a sense of lack of safety. It's one that's a little hard to sympathize with, but that's what it is. They could be afraid of being sidelined if they can't deliver and they're having difficulty getting these tests working. Writing tests not consistent with their idea of what a developer is. That is definitely a thing that happens. Some are willing to investigate, and only some are willing to investigate the benefit while other folks don't like change. That can happen too. This could be a lack of knowledge. Maybe they half understand testing and they don't really know the rest of it. Maybe they prioritize the idea of contributing to the project more than they really prize the value of actually finishing individual tasks 100%. And you kind of have to ask the question, is that the worst thing in the world? They've made significant contributions and want to make more. So for the long-time contributor, they are experienced, obviously care about the project and their part in it. They've been a member of the community for a long time. Also, the changes in team practices aren't coming out of nowhere. What would prevent them from being more willing to make change? And I think in this situation, there are some that are a lot more common, that can be in common with the other developer. So you've got, lack of knowledge, a lack of safety, whether emotional or something else. In this situation, they did specifically call out that they just had a kid, they've got a new job. Having a lot of stressors and low-level distress in your life can certainly make it difficult to tolerate even small changes elsewhere. Ramping up that frustration real quick. So the project maintainer, let's look at them. This is a really big problem because if there's an executive decision to be made, it's up to them. Do they turn down contributions from someone who's in sync with the team's goals but just isn't quite finishing things? Do they overrule a longtime major contributor that's now part of a very public conflict? How are other contributors going to feel watching all of this play out? How are they going to feel about the project's practices and its commitment to them? That's a lot. And so we got a couple more. Fear of change and mindset are common issues with a lot of the disciplines in the quality of code toolbox, like development standards. I think that is very true. That's a very good thing to call out. So how would these folks even move forward here? One important thing to consider, this is still a community and conflict itself is not a failure. So we still can reasonably assume that everybody operating in this context still has shared values. They're members of the community, they're interacting with each other. They all care about this project and what they're doing on it. That's an amazing place to start from. You can accomplish so much starting from that position. And trust is maybe starting to get strained, but it's not necessarily broken at any point yet. The specific practices are probably not the issue. There's definitely some needs here that aren't getting met. And you need to ask the question whether these are needs you might even want to meet. But there are a whole lot of places you could relieve pressure, having other maintainers assist in implementing tests for people who are struggling with it until you have a much larger base of examples to work from in the project is something they could absolutely do. Having the community focus on improving documentation or providing more assistance in, maybe a Discord server that they have or something like that. But this is still a community. This is conflict but it's not necessarily a problem or a failure. Conflict is just people with different needs and values interacting with each other. So let's look at one last one. So we've got a small DevOps team that have gone from providing a small interface to Amazon Web Services for their company all the way up to now maintaining huge internal software projects for the entire organization. Their catalog continues to grow, as does their team, but they're having scalability issues. So available hands and expertise are not an issue. They can get anybody they need, but whole chunks of the team will have their work halted because of the failure of a single dependency. One small microservice goes down, or a library doesn't publish, something along those lines. And bug fixes, when they don't get assigned to the original author of an affected system, can take quite a long time to make it into production. So as the company has grown, they've implemented new practices to manage employees and get info about their own organization. So this will include performance metrics that are a component of every employee's evaluations. The ops team wanted to focus on service to other departments as sort of the central value of their team. And so they wanted to have a measurement of that. So their measurement attempts to judge accomplishments in service of that organizational goal of serving the other departments in the company. However, the leadership, having come from doing ops work and not wanting to make this too onerous, wanted to account for the reality that breakages in their system as they experience them can drag on for quite a while. If an effort gets blocked, the time will not count against those assigned to work on it. And additionally, as long as a tech lead can vouch for someone, lengthy times to work on a story are not seen as a negative. As the head of the team likes to say, some things are just hard and take a while. So several members of this team have, I missed a couple of clicks. So a couple members of this team have advocated for applying testing practices to all of their software in order to cut down on how much of the team's work is constantly blocked. So they let everyone know that it would be a great way to also improve trust from other teams in the organization towards ops, because they'd be able to deliver more reliably and faster. A couple of advocates even have examples in what they've produced in the normal course of their duties. They have a small password reset app for an internal system and a library that looks up database nodes in a particular data center, both of which were completely test-driven, have CI, they were stood up, had a few bug fixes in the first few days and haven't been touched and are still operating happily since. Also, those projects were implemented 3 years ago. No other projects have attempted to adopt testing practices, and the team as a whole does not see it as a priority. Where do we even start with this one? So what are the things that might drive rank and file team members to not support a testing effort in this situation? And I bet you some of you can probably pick out some big factors real quick. Anyone? Well, one of the things that's certainly a blocker is the very thing that determines the quality, magnitude, and continuation of their paycheck doesn't measure that work. And this is pretty self-focused, but also they're smart people and know their lives. Their best assessment is that trying to get involved in adopting these practices in this situation is just only going to negatively affect their life. And you kind of have to ask the question, are they wrong? And as far as safety and knowledge concerns go, what are the team's training practices? Do people have room to learn outside of duress with a story hanging over their heads? If this is a team that's constantly behind on delivering things, they probably don't have a lot of room for learning. And interference with existing meaningless metrics. Yes. That is something that can absolutely sabotage things. What can be done about this? From their side, not much. This is going to require advocacy to leadership. Leadership, they're the people who are going to have to change some things. The team members on the team who don't want to test, they have a justification, and it's very much worth not sidelining. And so let's go higher up the ranks. What about the leadership? These are folks who are heavily invested in an effort to understand and report on their own team, but they're also concerned about how they look to other departments and how effectively they're actually delivering things. What would prevent them from adopting practices that would have huge demonstrable benefits to this whole situation? There's certainly immediately the accountability to other teams for delivery. If they're already behind and everyone knows they take a while to get things done, that is going to be a constant concern that's going to take their attention away from most other things. They may also be concerned, does this need to change how they end up measuring success? Adjusting their system is going to be complicated, and it also opens them up to some vulnerability. How much leeway is there even for change from them? Are they going to be held by the rest of the company to these originally negotiated team metrics just now and forever? Or is there a concern on the part of the DevOps leadership that opening it up for change would negatively affect their team because of who else in the organization might get to decide their rules? What can be done about that? People can provide minimal actionable plans with buy-in from people on the team saying, hey, we want to start this project with testing. Here are the ways in which we think it's perfectly manageable. It's an experiment. Here's how we can, cut bait and back off if things start going wrong and just do business as usual. They can suggest practices that will try as hard as they can to be designed such that they don't prompt conflict where it doesn't need to be brought up, which in and of itself may not actually be possible at all in this situation. And this brings us to the advocates, because those suggestions are things that they have already been doing. This is a team with multiple advocates across it with good track records. They have delivered. They should have all the ammo in the world. And so you might ask the question, why would they not pursue their cause as fully as they possibly could? And honestly, they already are. They likely have no desire to alienate their teammates, and it's not worth being right about an abstract idea when no one wants to talk to you or work with you. And on top of that, these are people who are under the exact same job requirements as the skeptics. These are people who have gone above and beyond, and there's a limit to that. After a certain point, what's in it for them? And then you kind of have to ask the question, should anything be done about that? And I think one thing to keep in mind in any situation where you're trying to help a team adopt new practices, know your limits and the team's limits. A collaborative effort involves give and take, and sometimes it can be very worth it to provide a lot early on to help get past some inertia, but there are going to be times when you may just need to decide that the give is not even close to being worth the take. So it's very worth noting that relationships and trust are not something that's built overnight, and they come as a result of tons of smaller daily interactions. And so there's a lot of things that we use as sort of common team building and knowledge sharing tools that I think can be used frequently to help build some of this. So we use the word collaboration a lot, but what do we mean by this? I think a good operating definition is building strong relationships with your team, knowing how people are feeling about whatever work is going on, knowing what they care about, making intentional effort to welcome input and feedback on anything you're involved in, trying to intentionally create space for other team members to express themselves, support members who may not be readily heard out by everyone. These are all things that need to be baseline practices on any team. Larger goals are going to fail if the team can't do this. So another thing people talk about a lot, we've got lunch where you learn things. And a lot of times these can be talks that will focus on what has this team accomplished and delivered for this organization this quarter. And it can easily become the sort of thing where this is a place for tech leads to give everyone an update on this thing they just shipped. Or it's something where everybody feels like it needs to be directly involved with the day-to-day work that the team is doing. But this is a place that you can invite people to become more present, more full members of the team by allowing them to teach you about things that may be outside of the normal subjects you cover. Inviting someone to present on knowledge they have is incredibly valuable, even if it's something entirely arbitrary. Even if it's a weird hobby that they have, I'm pretty sure everybody else on the team is probably going to welcome an opportunity to attend a talk that's a nice break from what they're working on. And the whole goal of this is that you have everyone listening to each other, and that you are, as a matter of actual course, inviting people to share things with others. Pairing. Almost everybody these days seems to enjoy the benefits of pairing, even if we don't always get to it as much as we are supposed to. There is a lot to like with pairing, but this is a thing that has an intense emotional cost. It is a lot of work pairing with people frequently. And it's a small scale practice between two people, but they are behaving as equals. They are constantly making space for one another while trying to fit their ideas into this collaborative effort. What they accomplish is sometimes much less important than building that relationship. And something that's come up quite a bit, examples. If you're trying to convince anyone to do something, if you're trying to make it easier for people, examples, and examples in what the team is working on. These clear so much of the way for big things to happen. And most importantly, if you're an advocate in any of these situations, you need to allow your expectations to change. So firstly, you do need to meet people where they are. If these are people who are going to be working on this, they have to be a part of it. And if you need to travel some distance, that's pretty normal. If your position is good, others will see its value, and they're going to help make it even better with their contributions. And if your position doesn't pan out, if it maybe wasn't the best idea in the world, you also get to learn from that. And I don't mean that in like a patronizing, like we all learn from mistakes sort of way. What I mean is the team learns. If you fail inclusively, you've still built community, you've shared knowledge, you've made other members of the team feel safer, and you've invited them to take ownership of the thing the team is doing together. That's only going to be a benefit as time goes on. So a companion point to this, it's often easy to wonder why it can be so difficult to motivate people towards a shared goal. A very important thing to keep in mind: human motivation comes from happiness and safety. Please don't tell people to eat their vegetables. It's really easy to advocate for new practices while also being dismissive, whether intentionally or not, of the experiences of others. Inclusion and building a community of peers who feel safe and supported is just naturally going to produce people making amazing things. Human creativity is not a thing that exists in spite of challenges and limitations. Challenges and limitations exist in spite of the fact that they have not been able to stop humans from doing weird stuff. Above all else, if someone doesn't share your values, they have a reason for that. It might not be the best reason in the world, but not acknowledging that and trying to push past it because you don't consider it valuable is missing a problem that needs to be addressed. It erases a person from a conversation when the thing you need most is for them to be a participant. And the testing itself, I don't think always needs as much broad focus as we give it. It is its own discipline, and there's a ton of valuable information out there, but also it's code. We all write code constantly. You learn how to do a new application of it, but this is not a radically different task to what people are already going to be doing in their day-to-day work. And success on a team is going to come from everyone being invited to participate, being respected, having ownership of this. If we're all going to do it, we have to do it together. And so the answer to the question of how do you get a team to start testing, you build community. And when in doubt, and when I'm looking for direction, there's a favorite maxim of mine that I frequently like to go to. We work with computers a lot, and we work with those computers and code software for them in order to do things for and with people. And so the more important thing is getting the people to work together. And if you have that, you can accomplish some amazing things and push through some serious technical challenges.